Yeah, Mercy, thank you very much. And thanks for organizing this, to have this wonderful panelists on this panel to discuss one of the key challenges that investors and promoters face on the African continent. You really do not want to start doing a deal thinking you have a successful end, and you end up not having a successful conclusion, and you have spent resources, scarce resources, to come that far. Before I introduce my panelists, I will just introduce myself. I am Godfrey Mindari, and I'm one of the three partners of the Avishka Africa Fund. Avishka Africa Fund is a $100 million fund that we are raising to invest in early stage businesses in East Africa. We are looking at three broad clusters. Agriculture is one big cluster. Financial inclusion is the second cluster. And the third cluster is essential services that include healthcare, education, waste management, and renewable energy. So just like a promoter, we are also on the road trying to raise funding for our fund. And therefore, the topic is dear to us as fund managers, just as it is to an investor or a promoter. You don't want to come a very long way feeling that you have a deal and the deal falls through. So that's the bit about myself, and I would like my panelists to introduce themselves, tell us who they are, the organization they work for, and why they are passionate about this topic. So I will start with Kanini, then after that, Adelaide, we'll have Salami, and then Tamir will introduce themselves. So Kanini, start the introduction.
Thank you, Godfrey, and welcome everyone to this session. Really looking forward to hearing the engagement. My name is Kanini Mutoni, and I'm a managing director at Draper Richards Kaplan. We are a venture philanthropy firm that focuses on investing in social enterprises that are trying to solve some of the complex challenges in the world. We have about 180 companies that we've invested in, both on the for-profit side and the nonprofit side. And my contributions today will really focus on patient capital, really, and the challenges that patient capital has in investing in early stage companies and organizations in Africa and India, and just sharing some of the issues that have occurred that have prevented deals from going forward. Just to add, my sort of experience and hats are on the early stage side, but I'm also a senior advisor for a number of private equity firms in Africa. So I have the opportunity of being able to really understand and look at the full spectrum of how capital is deployed, right from the early stages all the way up into the late Series B, Series C. So excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Kanini. Adelaide, your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adelaide Odhiambo. Very excited to be here and looking forward to this engaging yet very exciting conversation, which I think is more of a continental agenda, an African continental agenda. We at Blue Wave, we strive to bring micro insurance solutions to those who are largely underserved by conventional products. We have built a robust microinsurance platform that enables fast, efficient, quick, and affordable deployment. So what we try to do is target anybody, even those with the most basic, simple feature phones. All you need to do is either dial in through simple SMS messaging or our USSD platforms. You can be able to enroll, you can be able to find out more details about your product. We are building now an education module that will enable people to understand the products and the policies via their vernacular languages. And of course, the cream of insurance is efficiency in claims processing. We do have a specific target on the low income segment. And as you will imagine, and as we discussed, this is a very difficult market in the sense that most of our customers have not interacted with insurance before, and the little that have unfortunately had such huge mistrust because they either know somebody who was not paid on time, or they just have an issue with a very small wallet size to actually prioritize insurance in the first place. So we work around the clock to solve these challenges using technology to ensure that Africa, which is largely underinsured by less than 2%, can actually have access to these critical insurance solutions. And that is our bid to combat poverty within the continent. So thank you, and I'll be sharing a lot more of these thoughts, and of course the challenges around fundraising for an industry that is difficult to solve. And we'll be looking forward to interacting with you and your questions, of course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Adelaide. Now to my West African brother, Salami. And I think we've intentionally curated this to comprise both East and West. People who have experiences in East Africa, as well as those who have experiences in West Africa. We don't know, but probably from this discussion, we probably can see a varied issues that make deals fall through, or there will be a convergence. So Salami, introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Godfrey, and good to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Salami Abolore, and good to see a few familiar faces here. Hi, Petusente. Again, I mean, I think the exciting thing I'd love to mention is how I've been to Nairobi about 10 times in the last 3 years. So I'm really looking forward to you guys just giving me a visa so I don't have to apply at the embassy every single time. But again, what do? I run a company called Ribi, and we're a digital financial services company. Essentially, we understand that there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap between people that need financial services and people that have access to financial services. I mean, a lot of people, billions around the world and hundreds of millions around the continent, and in Nigeria alone, about 60, 70 million people that do not just have the access to the financial services they need. It's not a matter of them not wanting to or not being able to go through a few steps to be able to qualify for those financial services, be it savings, loans, investment, pension, mortgage, HMO, health finance, and so on and so forth. And what we have done at Ribi is just build the right technology solutions and connect these people that need access to financial services to these financial services that they need. So far, on our platform, we've offered, I think, about 5 different products, or we supported about 5 different products. Savings, of course, to a lesser extent, 90 million people in Nigeria cannot save, even if they wanted to. And if you think about that, you understand how huge a population that is. Maybe about 2% of the people have more than $1,000 in their account. The rest of the 98% have less than $1,000 in their account. So you begin to ask yourself, really, savings where we should be focusing. But we've done savings, we've done loans, we've done social safety net programs, more like job loss support. We've done health insurance. We're doing investments, and we hope to ensure that our platform becomes that platform that makes it easy for everybody to be able to access the financial services they need, which we connect them to. So far, we've connected over 2 million people to access the financial services, and we've onboarded about 6 million people in that process. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts today on deal breakers, but more importantly, also on business builders that I think is critical for investors and promoters to look at on the continent. Thank you, Godfrey.
Thank you, Salami. Last but not the least, Tamer. And Tamer, I think your position is unique because you have invested in both East and West Africa, and your thoughts, where we look forward to your thoughts to see if there's convergence of challenges or they are varied depending on the region that you are in. Over to you, Tamer.
Hey, thanks, Jeffrey. And actually, I would like to, Godfrey, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be among such a fine group of people. Godfrey, I'll just make a quick comment. I don't think there is much difference between the East and the West, neither North or South. At the end of the day, it's all people trying to do good business, right? So yeah, I'm Tamer Rakti. I'm the managing director of Acme Capital Partners. We manage an investment vehicle, a resilient agriculture investment vehicle of $60 million We invest in early growth stage agriculture and food businesses with business models that help smaller farmers become more resilient to climate change. That's the core of our thesis. Climate change is a fact of life. It's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. And we bet on businesses that will help those that are affected the most, which are smaller farmers in Africa, actually become more resilient to climate change. Usually our sweet spot when it comes to investments is it's in the Series A or pre-A. So you always find us part of the fundraisers of $5 to $10 million. Our ticket size is $1 to $3 million, and we invest in East Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. So, basically that's our mandate, and I look forward to being part of that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, awesome, everybody, and thanks for the succinct introduction of yourselves and the organizations that you represent. I guess that takes me to the main meal of this panel discussion, which is the topic, top 3 reasons why deals fall through. Who is to blame, or there's no one to be blamed? It's just the fact of nature. I'll start with my first question, and I'll direct it, first of all, to the investors who are on the panel, Tamir and Kanini. And I'll start with Kanini before Tamir comes in. In your experience, having done deals in the impact investing space, and you did introduce yourself, you've done deals in the early stage investing, but you also have advised traditional PEs. In your view, what are the top 3 reasons why deals fall through after you engage with a promoter and you're looking forward to doing the transaction? And particularly, I want you, if there's any difference between early stage deal making, or the reasons for deal falling through is different from that of traditional PE.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question, Godfrey. And, I think, the first sort of point to acknowledge is that, impact investing and impact capital, I think, has made a huge difference in terms of making capital available for early stage entrepreneurs who are in what we call the pioneer gap. You can call it the pioneer gap. You can call it the valley of death. You can call it the missing middle. But I feel impact capital has come in. When I say impact capital, I mean capital that is predicated on social, environmental returns first before financial returns. So I just want to make it clear. While it's come in and made such a big difference, I think one other issue is that we find a lot of early stage organizations almost trying to turn themselves into social enterprises or high impact enterprises, even if that's not the core of their model. So I find this is one of the areas that has caused problems, in the sense that you meet an entrepreneur, model looks interesting, there's a clear focus on social impact. But when you start to dig a little bit deeper, you quickly realize that the entrepreneur is simply trying to shift the organization to be much more attractive to an impact investor. And what that means is that impact is not really baked into the model itself. And what happens in a situation like that is that, as impact investors are, by the 4th call with an entrepreneur, will be asking, what are your target impact metrics? How do you intend to measure? What is your theory of change? What is the difference between your outcomes and your inputs? How are you going to collect data? As soon as you start to ask these questions, you quickly realize there are no answers, or the answers that are being given are really loose, not really well thought out. And you quickly realize that the deck that you had received was really just prepared for an impact investor's eye, but the real model itself wasn't baked into impact. And I typically call these entrepreneurs who are faking it before they make it, which in some instances is helpful when you're doing a pitch, but honestly, I find this has been the primary reason for us walking away, when we quickly realize that the depth of seriousness of impact is not really baked into the model of the organization. So I think my advice to anyone who's on the call, who is a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, is don't turn yourself into a social impact business if you are not one, just to be able to access money, because a real impact investor will quite quickly discover that this is not real. So I wanted to share that, just at the outset in terms of issues that we've seen. I think another point to raise is that when you're dealing with early stage organizations, especially during COVID, we haven't had the opportunity to travel. So there's a lot more reliance on third-party conversations and confirmation. So talking to either an earlier grant deployer, or talking to a supplier, or talking to any organization that has come into contact with this particular pipeline company. And unfortunately, what this has meant is that, I think we're doing a lot more remote work than we were doing before. It also means the extent of relying on third parties, in my mind, has become much greater, because you need much more, you need to mitigate your risk much more, because you're physically not going to be seeing the entrepreneur. So there have been instances of, when you do your checks, when you talk to other, sort of earlier investors, you quickly start to realize that some of the things that the entrepreneur has claimed to be doing or did is not completely accurate. And I think for me personally, integrity is probably one of the most important things that an entrepreneur can bring to the table. So just being clear, being transparent, and having real integrity in what you tell an investor, because unfortunately, we will find out the truth. And that's not a threat, it's just a fact. So again, that's one of the things that I've seen, at least in the last 12 months, that have sort of thrown spanners in the works when an entrepreneur is telling you one thing, and when you do your sort of double checks and third-party confirmations and further conversations, you quickly find that those two things are nowhere near aligned. So I think that's another reason that we're seeing lots of what I'd call failed deals in the market. And to be honest, when you look at Series B, Series C, it's rare. I think it's much rarer that you'd find those sorts of issues. I think that's been my experience, because those are much more sort of established players. They've been in the market much longer. They've got a level of credibility that comes with them. Whereas on the early stage side, these great folks are working so hard, are still trying to make a mark. And, they may be tempted to make things much more, much more than what they should, much more than what they seem. I think the third thing as well, again, this is more a COVID issue as well, is when you're an investor who's not based in the context that you're investing in, that can be really problematic. And that's one of the reasons why DRK as an organization has made the decision to set up a base in East Africa, even if we've been investing on the continent for the last, over the last 10 years. We've made a clear decision to set up a base, set up a team in Nairobi to make sure that we're supporting not just the organizations that we're going to invest in, but our existing portfolio. Again, when you're an investor flying in and flying out, there's so many things that can be set up for you when you come in. And unfortunately, you miss seeing a lot of the context that the entrepreneur is working in, which can mean everything looks great on a deck. The first couple of conversations go well, but when you fly into the country, spend 3 days, leave, other facts might come into light. So I would just say, for all the investors on the call right now, it's important to have a local base, and not just a base where you have expat employees. Ensure that you have local employees who are able to really understand the context that you're investing in and can ask the right questions and understand the macro environment that these entrepreneurs are working in. So I would say those are sort of my top 3 at the moment that I would be happy to share and discuss. And people can disagree with me if they like, but this is just the experience that I've seen in the context that I've been working in.
Panini, I've just got one question that I I actually put it on the post. I may as well read it out to you. I guess this is God sent for me, right? And I'll put it to the panel, even though I know we're not open for questions as yet. But since Godfrey has disappeared and I'm unprepared for these things, I'll put to you that part of the issue that you've raised around don't be an entrepreneur or don't make yourself a social entrepreneur just to source money. I'll put to you that part of the issue around this topic has been that there is way too many soft pools of capital in the country. And that is distorting the market. And I would almost say that there is an element of crowding out, and that's partly causing a lot of the deal failures that we're beginning to see, because people think, or founders or entrepreneurs think, there is an easier way to raise capital. What would you guys say to that? And also, you know, has been a cause for some of the inflations in value and structures.
Would you? I'm happy to make a comment here. Ashish, thank you for raising this. It's a very good point. It's a valid point. I'm really open to hear what you know, my colleague from Acumen would like to say about this. I mean, you're absolutely right. Whilst there are large pools of soft capital available, you know, I pride myself in being, you know, excuse the term, a true impact investor, in the sense that, as I mentioned before, you have to have impact baked into the model right from the outset. You've got to have a view about what your impact metrics are going to be. You've got to have a clear view about your theory of change. But that also means that if we're coming in at an early stage, what we're going to really work hard to do is catalyze commercial capital along the spectrum, meaning we come in at an early stage, and when the organization starts to grow and scale, we should be crowding in, you know, more commercial sources of capital. So I always balk when I see a deck from an entrepreneur who's been on soft capital, been on non-dilutive capital for 10 years. That's a red flag for me, because there should be some form of graduation from, you know, early stage soft capital to slightly more commercial types of capital, whether it's a DFI side, whether it's an institutional investor that still values impact. But you can't build a business over a 10-year period on grants. That's usually, I would say, a red flag in terms of where I would deploy my capital. So very good point, but ultimately it sits on the investor to be clear about what they're looking for. But at the same time, the entrepreneur has to ensure that they're not shifting their business to just please the pool of capital that they're chasing. I'd love to hear what Tamar.
Okay. Yeah, no, wonderful. Just to summarize a couple of the points I got from you, you were saying that people should not fake it to make it. Integrity is an issue, and one way or the other, you will be found out. You shouldn't also pivot your business model towards impact investing or towards the source of capital, because it is there. You are not impact oriented. One way or the other, as they dig deep, they will find out that that's not your intention. The other point you made was the issue of you know, a lack of context, where people need to have people on the ground. They understand the local context, and therefore a local team will do us a lot of good. And you also talked about the issue of, you know, you shouldn't be on one source of capital for all your life. Just as a human being, you have to walk, crawl, and run. So when you start with the soft money, one way or the other, you need to graduate. And as you graduate, the different sources of capital come with their own requirements and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. We'll come back again and you will add more to it. Tamir, what's your view?
Okay, so first let me thank Kamini for her input, and I can't agree more. Soft money, to your point, Ash, in your question about soft money, well, it's a double-edged sword. You know, we have all seen companies living on soft money for several years, and that's not healthy. Soft money is good so long as it's catalytic. Soft money is good so long as it fits gaps at early stage of the business, where the business doesn't have enough cash flow to do things like, in our case, you know, farmers training, for instance. supporting stuff like that, capacity building, stuff that, you know, early stage companies don't have the cash flow to support. That's when grant money becomes so valuable. However, you know, seeing companies living on soft money, it's unhealthy for the company, it's unhealthy for the sector, and it's not good for the branding of the region as well. We are big believers in using soft money as catalytic, but for, you know, for a specific period of time during the life cycle of the business, and then let the market speak. Let commercial capital kick in and take over and see if the business is sustainable. I think that's the key. And Godfrey, do you want me to also comment on the initial point about the reasons transactions fall through?
Yes, please go ahead. Sure. Share your thoughts.
So I think that the first point I would like to.
If we've lost Amer, can I ask the promoters to share their thoughts, having gone through such journeys before, what they think are the top 3 reasons why deals fall through? Can we start with Adelaide if Amer is still not on?
Sure. In fact, I was trying to fumble with my internet, thinking that it was I who dropped off. I'm glad I'm online. So I think from a startup or a promoter perspective, what I feel is the largest challenge why these deals fall through. Trying to speak quite generally, but you'll excuse me as I'll be a little bit more industry centric, because unlike investors, you kind of have a more generalized approach to your portfolio companies, and you try to dig and research quite broadly on the different markets. So what happens is, with that kind of broad approach rather to how you harness and manage your pipeline, you'll find that it creates a sense of limited information when you dig deeper into being a little bit more industry centric. So at Blue Wave, we are in microinsurance. So insurance specifically has had multiple challenges because of the underlying issues around cost, trust, understanding how insurance generally works as a financial service, and of course, the very obvious access to insurance. So you'll find that most of the investors who are within the impact space require to have quite some significant technical awareness and technical information on the intrinsic nature of this kind of financial service. If you look at fintech and specific to digital lending, loans, whether brick and mortar or just the modernized platforms, these kind of products, these kind of startups and companies have quite significant data and have really created a lot of traction globally. If you're looking at emerging markets specifically, you will find that the data involved in these kind of entrepreneurs is quite significant, because it's a lot. When you get into insurtech, for instance, a lot of this kind of data is not readily available. And if you're looking at Africa as a continent, then you're struggling to compare information of perhaps less than 2% of that population having access to this particular service. So it does create a huge, somewhat awkward scenario where conversations are stalling, but the investors are really struggling to also understand this particular field. So I find that those of us within the insurtech space, and even digging deeper into microinsurance, which as you may imagine has even a lot more challenges in regards to accessing to the last mile, educating this particular customer to appreciate and understand, and then again going to the further effort of actually challenging their very small wallet size to be able to sacrifice insurance for food, or part of their income that they would probably challenge into school fees or healthcare or transport to work every morning to insurance. So you find that understanding the depth of information in a more of an industry-centric approach is usually very limited on the entrepreneur, on the investor side. And you'll find that some of these deals sometimes may stall very long because they're either trying to get technical experts, consultants to look into how the margins and how these particular industries behave. So I believe that for some startup, depending on the industry where you are, then it becomes a lot more of a challenge. And microinsurance, I believe, just the last 2 to 3 years has really now emerged somewhat in the front row of a sector that is looking very attractive just because of the unexplored opportunities that are there. But we still don't even have significant, really exciting case studies that show that this is an exciting sort of business model. So I guess that struggle brings in a lot of deals just falling through 1 month, 3 months, 6 months down the line. Both the investor and the entrepreneur are getting a bit fatigued because it's just not enough data to really ascertain what is really going on with this particular industry, although there seems to be an exciting buzz around on what the opportunities look like. I think if you also consider the fact that Africa has had numerous challenges with how dynamic it is as a continent. Many investors, and impact investing specifically, most of these funds largely come from developed nations. We're looking at Europe, we're looking at US. That is the bulk of where most of these investments come from. Local investors, I think there's a very small threshold or a very small percentage that that find this kind of investment attractive or interesting to them. So because we have the of investment coming in from developed worlds who unfortunately have a huge ignorance on how Africa operates. And because of that, you'll find that there's a struggle to really understand the continent. And Africa does present quite a lot of challenges because all the states work very individually. You have to navigate all the different countries, their political environments. You have to understand the regulatory environments. So scaling across Africa is more of a myth. And you'll find that this would make them very attractive to perhaps the extremely populous nations within continent, hence shifting a lot of the focus towards this place. But I would almost say a little bit shyly that Africa can be a little bit scary or and overwhelming for an investor who doesn't understand the dynamics. It has huge resources, huge opportunity, but the lack of information to harness this continent and how it operates creates a lot of either fear or slowness, or in many times just seeing that these deals fall through because of that perspective. And then maybe just in closing, I would talk about the model. A little bit tied to my very point on understanding the industry that this particular startup is operating on and having the technical understanding of the dynamics. We are finding that when you're looking at, I was so excited when Kanini mentioned that a lot of your primary focus is impact first before you actually think of profitability. And then that sounds very exciting, but unfortunately, most of those who are presenting themselves quite strongly on investments are VCs, people who have raised big pools, and they're either very industry-centric and they're really looking at commercial profitability at a specific time. Some models require a lot of time, before 5-6 years before you're finding them now really shooting up into the growth stage. So you'll find that some of these business models, there's a lot of slowness in uptake because the traction looks very small at start, but yet the business is being refined over time. And again, tied to my other point that the technical awareness of how some of these startups run and operate is also lacking. So I, from a personal perspective, and this is speaking out of for the last 3 to 4 years, I've at least engaged with over 200 different investors in my time before raising my first seed. We're now going to a pre-series A, but just the challenges, I think the core of the challenges is me really struggling to explain the longevity of the pipeline when you're looking at microinsurance, and trying to marry that with the kind of traction, with the kind of anticipation with this particular investor. And many times we fall through because, again, just that technical understanding is not there. So let me know if that makes a lot of sense, or I'm just yapping around. But I think, in my opinion, from a startup perspective, those are some of the things that I've picked out in regards to why some of these challenges fall through. Thank you, Godfrey.
Yes, thank you, Adelaide. And I feel your frustration, particularly having had over 200 discussions in terms of trying to raise money. If I seem to get you right, would the key things that you feel are responsible for deal falling through is particularly in the emerging sectors like data backing what the industry looks like, because it's an emerging industry. And tied to that is just the general lack of data in Africa that makes people petrified, even when there's no danger, but the data is not there to let people know that there's no danger lying ahead. And the continent can be daunting because of its historical attachments that they have given to the continent. And of course, you talked about source of money. Many of it is coming from foreign countries. And if they don't have full ties, back to Kanini's point, if they don't have presence on the ground, will lack the local context and not even understand the business model. If we have Tamil on the line, can he continue his line of thought? Otherwise, I will go to Salami.
Thanks, Godfrey. And sorry, guys, I lost my internet connection. And what I like about losing the internet connection or losing power, it's a unifier, it's equalizer. You know, we all go through it in wherever you are in Africa. So I love it. So sorry about that. So I was talking about why deals fall through, and I was talking about trust and how trust is super important, and it takes time to build that trust. And when trust is not there, you'll always find that deals don't go forward. The other one is governance. You'll always find that, you know, the investors, institutional investors, look at governance as a way of having, you know, the right checks and balances, making sure that, you know, the business is managed properly and it grows in a healthy way, and also positions the business for further capital, you know, raise and then ultimately an exit. While on the other hand, you'll find that sometimes some entrepreneurs look at governance and as a way of or a sign of losing control. Okay, well, this is my baby. I built it from scratch. What do you mean by asking, you know, that I lose control over the board? Stuff like that. No intentions on both sides. It is just expectations, and you know, sometimes when people don't reach a common ground, you know, again, transactions don't go forward. Misalignment on expectations, we see that a lot. And whether it's a $1 million transaction or a $100 million transaction, it could be valuation, and it's always best to agree on that early on. But the valuation as a number is not enough, because valuation is a number that people agree on and then sign a term sheet, and then comes the time for DD. And then when DD happens, the due diligence, well, you know, investors could discover that if it's an early stage business, is that the market is not as big as they thought before they agreed on the valuation, or that the picture that was painted is not fairly accurate. Or if it's a later stage transaction, then you realize that in the financial DD that EBITDA level is not as high. And it's always important that people understand and agree from day one that even valuation is subject to DD, because if you agree on a specific valuation, then DD shows that there is a significant tax liability, well, someone needs to pay for that, right? So it's always better to agree that this valuation is pending DD. Otherwise, people sometimes, many times, they agree on valuation and then post DD, the transaction falls through. One other thing that we also see is, the readiness of the promoter. Sometimes the promoter is out raising capital, but the promoter is not ready for what it takes to raise capital. Raising capital is a marathon for both parties. And, deal fatigue is something that we have seen on both sides of the table. Either the entrepreneur getting tired of the process or the investor getting tired of spending time, money, and effort and just wanting to move forward. One thing that we always explain to entrepreneurs that as investors, we don't like it when deals fall through for the wrong reasons. We don't mind if the deal doesn't go forward for the right reasons. But if it's just a matter of that it's taking too long, etc., it's a lose-lose situation when all said and done. So deal fatigue is something that we see all the time. One last point, so I don't hijack the discussion. Godfrey, you asked about the macro, and we have seen it in larger transactions where the effective currency could be significant. I've been part of mega transactions that fell through in the 11th hour because there was devaluation of currency, for instance, and then parties will disagree who will bear that consequence, because guess what, it affects valuation, because it affects cash flow, it affects even the macro environment. A significant devaluation in the Egyptian pound a few years ago affected supply and demand, etc., etc. So all of those together, among other things, of course, we have seen firsthand resulting in transactions don't go through. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Before I bring in Salami, I think you were very succinct and spot on. I used to call them the 10 commandments of doing deals. And one, you mentioned trust. Trust is very important. It's like marriage. And if in the beginning you can't establish trust, forget it. And of course, the governance bit, a promoter should not run the business for their lifestyle. Feel like the company is a piggy bank to support their lifestyle. And for that matter, they don't want to, let investors know how much they are using for their own entertainment. Then you also have you say management misalignment of expectations on both amount, valuation. And the fourth point you made was the promoter readiness, and the fact that they should know this is a marathon and you need to be prepared to dig heavy. And of course, the micro factors is outside of our control, but they also contribute significantly to deal falling through, particularly in Africa and in fragile markets where the fundamentals are not strong. Salami, tell me your own experience of why you had discussions with people and you thought you were having a deal and the deal fell through.
Thank you, Godfrey. And if my connection, like Tamara said, goes bad, I'll probably go off video. But again, thank you to Tamara, and I want to get the name right. Okay, maybe I can get it now. In terms of the comment around, entrepreneurial readiness, the social impact readiness, when impact, the alignment, pressure from investors, also in terms of third-party confirmation. I mean, I think these are very good points, and I, as an entrepreneur, appreciate hearing all of that from investors. So I think this has been a very valuable session for me already. And I respect every point that has been made. And I think that what I would love to also, plead for or request for is for the investors to also kind of think about what you could call the see it from the other side, right? And that's what I'm hoping that my few points. I have quite a bit of points, but I have 5 minutes. Godfrey, correct?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Let us hear your thoughts. That's the essence.
I know. I want to restrict it. I want
be punchy.
I want to restrict it. I want to make sure that I don't go as to why I think that investors don't, or the deal fall through, and I want to ensure that I stick to time. Now, the first thing is, I think one of the things that some investors have not yet established is communication. I think that in as much as we want to, I get the part where a lot of us as entrepreneurs or promoters have not done the due diligence, the work, the rigor to be ready for that investment process. But I think that investors also need to become a little bit more conscious about how you are communicating with entrepreneurs and how you are, pretty much giving the investor the confidence, the entrepreneur the confidence of access to you. And an example of that is recently we're talking to an investor. I only have one non-Nigerian investor. I have investors that have several global funds as LPs, but all my investors are Nigerian investors except for one, which is a non-Nigerian investor. But we're talking to a number of non-Nigerian investors right now. And for me, and I'm happy that one of the things they said is, he literally called me on the phone and said, Salami, I'm in Ivory Coast. Our main company is in Netherlands. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my lights just went off. But we're back in 30 seconds. But I want you to know that I'm always available if you want to talk about anything. And he gave me an example as to why a deal fell through because, he just didn't have that conversation with the entrepreneur. So I think that's the first thing that we need to be very conscious of as investors. You need to establish that clear line of conversation and that clear line of trust with the entrepreneur. I see that being a very huge factor. I would run through a number of the other things, but I think that is one of the biggest. Of course, we talk things about macroeconomic situations. Dollar has been depreciated 3 times in the last 5 years in Nigeria. So that can be very, very painful. And of course, everywhere around the world as well. Things around regulation, say, for example, cryptocurrency, central bank is cracking down on that, for example, in Nigeria. So that can also be very difficult and can be a reason why an investor says, hey, you know what, I'm just not comfortable. I'm not sure that this business is regulated enough, or I'm not clear about the regulation, and for good reasons. I've seen that happen. We've talked about, you can think about things like size of markets. I think, there's also one important point which can be called truth. Just the truth. Is it true? Godfrey, I hope you can still hear me. But the truth, the fact of truth is both on the investor side as well as on the entrepreneur side. In as much as sometimes there's not just enough transparency and clarity, and maybe there's too much hype on the entrepreneur side, there's just a lot of also false information on the investor side. Some investors will claim they have money, but they don't have money. Some investors will claim that your market is too small, but they just don't have the money to invest, or they've not, gone to do the deep dive. And sometimes they are right. The points might be correct, but that misalignment of expectation is also one very key factor. The other point that I've seen extensively is just, for example, the willingness of the of the investor to deal. Now, again, a lot has been said about the entrepreneur, so I'm focusing on the investor right now. Godfrey, I hope you can still hear me.
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, again, that willingness to deal, I'd say is probably number 2, is probably next to communication in terms of the importance of it, right? We've raised a couple $1 million for our business, and I can tell you very easily that the only reason we've been able to do that is the willingness of a few of our critical investors to deal. Not because they think that, it's a fantastic business, something I love to describe before I round up is something called the beer head effect in startups that I've seen a lot. Where businesses that come with a lot of hype get a lot of money, but really the money is why they grew, not because that they were more fantastic with the other option that didn't get a lot of hype. There's just that beer head effect where this is the beer and this is the cup and this is the beer. The beer is just up to this point, right? The rest of it is just foam, And then you have another business where this is the beer, but there's no foam. And then you prefer to invest in the business with the full beer defect. That has a shiny, fantastic entrepreneur who has been everywhere around the world and maybe studied in Harvard. Again, I don't blame investors, but just that beer defect is a big problem. Too much shiny things around why investors want to invest or don't want to invest. But that deal making, the lack of willingness to make deals, and that's my cue to end for now, I think it's very, very important. Again, like I said, understood the business, were able to dig into the opportunities in the market. They had the ability to be able to help the business scale, had the ability to be able to help the business build itself and grow. And I think that's the advantage that, investors like Y Combinator, like our own investors, Greenhouse or Passion Incubator has provided, because they don't stop at the level of just writing a check. They understand the market, they understand what the entrepreneurs and the team are trying to achieve. And they don't only bring money, they bring the ability to be able to help that business grow. A lot of the time, well, a good number of the times, investors don't do that, write that check or do that business because they don't see that, they don't have that potential, they don't have that ability. And I think that we need to start telling ourselves the truth as Rambo, right? I'm not going to take a gun and kill all the enemy so that the money can show up in their account. I wish I can. We need help. We need people to say, hey, I understand your business and this is how I'm going to support beyond providing the cash. And a lot of the time I see investors not being able to provide that support, and hence they don't go ahead with the deal. Again, I'll stop here for now. And please, full absolute maximum respect to all investors. I know how tough your work is, trying to raise the fund and make sure that you're growing the capital and all of that. But you also need to think about it from the point of the entrepreneur. This thing is not easy. I've been doing full-time running my business now for 5 years. We've been 80% grown on revenue, and we've done a few $1 million in revenue. I'll probably get to $5 million in revenue, even if we don't have any external investment. But that thing is freaking hard. Every month needs to come up with tens of thousands of dollars to pay salaries. Either your customer has paid you for the last 6 months or not. So I think we need to go a little bit beyond the surface as investors and start finding out what's really going on with entrepreneurs, what's going on with their business, what's going on with their market, what are their challenges. Most of the investors that I know that deals break or just stock, they are not doing shit for the business. They're not doing anything for the business. The guys that are going, grinding, working with the entrepreneur, making calls to support the entrepreneurs are probably even putting more cash. So again, for now, I'll stop. We just need to tell you some of these things. Godfrey.
Yeah, yes. Thank you very much. It's good you open your heart to tell us what it is, and I can take the issue of poor communication and building of trust. The issue of regulation can be a punitive or disincentive for people to invest, but I think that you are passionate about the ability of the investor to be able to add value, and they should be willing to deal and take risk. Thank you, everybody. Now, I'm gonna go to our second question, and it's not the number of solutions you can give, but after we have enumerated the problems, what do you think would be 1 or 2 advice you can give that can increase the success rate of deal making in the early stage investing space? Tamir?
Sure. Thanks, Godfrey. I know that it's coming from an investor. It's hard to swallow, but I've been an entrepreneur at one point in my life, and one thing I learned over the time wearing 2 hats is that valuation is important, but it's not the end of the world. I recall having a professor at NYU who taught us that your price might terms, that you can have the valuation you like, but then you have terms that will you make your life miserable. That it's important to focus on the bigger picture and focus on how to create value together as an entrepreneur and as an investor. Focus more on how, like, money is available. Actually, money is a commodity, and there is plenty of money. So we always tell the entrepreneurs, if you see in us only money, don't partner with us. If you see more value than money, then we are the right partner for you. Because this is a partnership. So, and that's the one thing that I would say that both parties should focus on a lot during the discussion is that if this thing works, how can the two parties, or if there are multiple investors, how can the parties create value together to create value for the business? And instead of just spending the time just discussing valuation, and we have seen it so many times that once the valuations agreed upon, people are happy, and then you'll find that the terms are tough ones. So I would actually advise that for entrepreneurs and investors to think and have that discussion early on about the value that can be created by the two parties.
Thank you very much. Kanini, what are your thoughts? What suggestions can you give to help increase the success rate?
Yeah, I really like what I've heard. I think it was Salami and Tamer that mentioned around trust building. And for me, the test that I like to apply is what I call the stuck in an airport test. And what that means is both for me as an investor and for the entrepreneur, think about whether you would like to be stuck in an airport for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours with this investor, and would you feel comfortable with this person? And this goes back to the analogy around an investment relationship being like a marriage. So if you really do feel uncomfortable with this individual, whether it is just a lack of values alignment, because that could be the issue, your values are just completely not aligned. You feel you don't trust this individual. You feel this individual does not understand who you are and why you're running your business. My sense is that that is the beginning of the end. So just keep that in mind as an investor, as an entrepreneur. Are you comfortable to be stuck in an airport with this individual for 6 hours? And if you are, and you feel comfortable, definitely go ahead. And I think there's a much higher probability of success if the answer to that question is yes. I think the other thing that's more on the tactical side, the other two solutions that are more tactical is governance. Tamer mentioned governance. And for us at DRK, one of the primary things that we request when we invest in a company is that we do take a board seat. And what that means is that we really do need to be comfortable with the governance structure. So when you're setting up a company as an entrepreneur, think about how complicated your structure is. I've seen companies where they have set up an entity in Panama with 3 other subsidiaries attached to it. And there's one in Greece, there's one in the UK, there's another one in the US. And I'm thinking, hold on, you're an early stage company, you're supposed to be mission focused. Why do you have such a complicated governance structure? And that is problematic. So I know this is not something that entrepreneurs think about in the beginning, but do be really careful about how you set up your governance structure, your jurisdictions, because that may become a factor when you're raising capital. Get some pro bono advice if you can from a lawyer, from an accountant to help you in that process. Because the more complicated that structure is, the more difficult it's going to be for a deal to come through, even if your investor is not going to take a board position. There's just too much reputational risk to be involved in an organization that has, sort of dodgy domicile. And even for funds, Godfrey, I'm sure you know this, now Mauritius as a domicile is becoming a problem for LPs. So just think about those things. They may seem very mundane and boring, but they may determine the outcome of a transaction. And then the last thing, again, tactical perspective, one thing that I'm really proud of that we do at DRK is that we share the diligence process with our pipeline companies. So the companies that we're thinking of going into diligence with, we have a beautiful diagram that we share, which shows each and every step of the diligence process, as well as all the documents that we will need. So I think that's fantastic to develop a relationship of trust. And also, it's also good for you as an entrepreneur to say, wow, I'm not ready for this, and I don't have half these documents. So to Salami's point, just be truthful and say, you know what, guys, not now, maybe in a year and a half, but there's no way this diligence process is going to be successful because I am so far from what you expect me to be, just looking at the diligence process. So yeah, those are things that we do and we practice. And I think if we integrate those things into our investment processes, we should have more success in getting deals to go through and not fall through.
Wonderful. Salami, can we hear your thoughts? What advice? I don't know, you could advise that pertains to even being a promoter yourself and having gone through the processes, advise other promoters, but you could also have a word of advice for investors if they really want to play ball in the space that you people are operating in.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Thanks again, Godfrey, and thanks, Kanini and Tamara. We love you guys. We know you have hard work, so please take our points with a little bit of pinch of salt. I think the first thing is, and this is both to us as promoters, entrepreneurs, and to investors. You need to. There's a problem. There's one problem. I've had that problem, and it took me a while to kind of repair that problem. Cap table destruction. First-time entrepreneurs are not necessarily bad entrepreneurs. They're probably just not used to all the language, pre-money, post-money. It takes 2 years to get used to all that stuff. I mean, I'd worked for 10 years before I actually finally started my venture-backed business, or finally left any form of paid employment and said, hey, is it that this works or I go hungry? So again, just to be clear, I think that cap table destruction being one of the problems is one of the things I think that serious investors should be willing to work with entrepreneurs to fix, right? You want to make sure that whatever is wrong with that cap table, if it's a good business, if it's a good entrepreneur, if it's a good market, you can fix it because it's fixable. Only greedy entrepreneurs or investors will be unwilling to fix their cap table, right? I mean, it's sad to say, but I mean, I think we've partially crossed some of that bridge now, but by the end of our seed round, you know, the whole process took about 2 years. It was my first time, you know, doing proper venture capital on my own, even though I was part of a company that raised $20 million before that, and so on and so forth. But between you and I, by the end of that process, our seed round, by the end of our seed round, our cap table had less than 60% of the company to the promoters of the business. That's extremely bad for any company. I mean, literally, and I was at the time also the only founder left because it's taken us about 3 years to even get the company left, and I had about 40% of the business. So as far as new investors were concerned, only 40% of the business belonged to a founder. Now, that is a fixable problem. So please don't run away because of a bad cap table. I know my current investors, for example, are very willing to say, hey, you know what, maybe I'll give back some of the shares. You know, I've said multiple times, hey, I'm willing to give away some of my shares to, you know, to bring on more people. And that's the kind of structure we then finally adopted in our company and implementing. So I think that is something that is very important and is not said enough. The second, maybe, I mean, I'll leave it here because of time, or you can ask me and I can give you 2 more points. The second point I love to talk about is sort of, you know, just, I think it's the willingness. If the investor wants to do the transaction, all parties should be willing to talk about it. Like, you know, of course, let's try not to do 10 meetings. I know that, you know, just doing your due diligence might be very difficult. And I wish that Kanini and Tamira can unmute so that we can banter on this point a bit. But don't do 10 meetings, do 3 meetings, maybe 4 meetings, and let's be done with it. If you're investing, invest. If you're not investing, let me move on and go and be looking for my customer. You know, yeah, Kanini, I see you're mute. If you wanted to say something, you could go ahead on that.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, but I just wanted to add as well that as investors, sometimes, yeah, if you want to do a deal, you'll do it. But I think I'm also learning that you have to not be emotionally attached to a deal as an investor, because sometimes, you know, we fall in love with the entrepreneur, we fall in love with the model, but that's a blind spot because you miss out on so many other aspects of the deal that might be wrong. And then you do all the diligence, you get to the IC, and the IC is like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, you didn't look at this, you didn't look at that, that doesn't make sense. And then as an investor, you think, wow, you know, it's because I was so taken by this model and by this entrepreneur that I really failed to see the relevant points. So I'm just sort of balancing it off against what you're saying, that yes, you can be focused and say, I'm going to do this thing, but pull the emotion out of the deal.
Agreed. Agreed. I think one of the things to solve that problem is just the streamlining, the cleaning up of the process of pre and post DD engagement. I mean, 5-10 meetings into DD is fine, but pre DD, let's keep it to 2 meetings or 3 meetings. The rest of it, give me a template, keep it open. Tell me I can take 3 months to fill that template at my own pace, and then I can come back to you. And I think the willingness to also go away and come back and build a relationship is also very important. And that's one of the things I'm beginning to see about some investors, and I'm beginning to appreciate them more. It helps you build relationship with that investor. And Kanini, like you said, that's the kind of investor you want to be stuck with at an airport, right? And I've seen 2 or 3 investors like that. One of them is Oiko Credit in Netherlands, and they invest across Africa. And they've shown themselves to be that kind of investor that are willing to go away, say, oh guys, we love what you're doing. You're not ready. We want to talk again. And they come back. They come back after 18 months, or, somebody does introduction. Hey, we like, we spoke that time. Okay, this didn't happen. Okay, but where are you guys now? Can we talk about it? Can you fill the information? Proparco, that's France, for the French Development Agency, has also shown that kind of willingness. So I think, Godfrey, let me just stop here. But I think that just that we're all human beings, right? If I was your sister or your brother or your son or your father, it's not impossible. If Bill Gates wanted to invest in the father's business, you would give me audience. You would talk to me. You would tell me what is real. It won't be robotic, and we'll have a conversation. And we'll say, hey, you know what? It's not good now. Let's not go ahead. But I want to talk again in 9 months. I'm going to set a calendar, and we're going to talk in 9 months. And that's the kind of conversations we should be having, investors to entrepreneurs, and not the very seeming, oh, I'm the investor, I got the money type of conversation that I see going on too often at time. With plea,
okay.
Again.
Okay, Adelaide, your thoughts last but not the least. What do you think we got to do to improve the process?
I think at this stage, I'll really just echo Salami's thoughts on time. Time is such a critical currency when trying to fundraise, and time comes with a lot of the different components of just having a lot of openness in regards to how quickly you will communicate your lack of interest or your interest in this particular venture. If we are going to just be very specific on impact investment, I think your thoughts, Kanini, in regards to what you're looking for when you invest. What kind of metrics do you want to monitor? Is it something that you could quickly help this particular startup or this particular promoter to bring up to speed in a specific time frame? Because if this is an area that you that you focus on, then I think you all have this data at your very fingertips. What I need, this is what I need from this startup, and if they have it, can you be able to help them get into that level of proficiency for you to very quickly make that determined decision to invest or not? So the around how quickly you invest will really be very critical in making this deal sweet and actually quite useful to this startup. You can imagine the pains of having 4, 5, or 6 different calls, repeating the same thing to a different audience. It's quite an extremely
it's a draining process.
It is. So if you can just speed up your thought process, and don't just mark time. Oh, let's see whether by next month the status update will be looking a little bit more attractive. Those kind of games, they really are not helpful. So I think if the entire industry can go into being very punchy and saying that, you know what, we are here on a 10-year play, and we know that your industry sector will grow in this kind of way, or you just don't show the metrics at your stage of fundraising that is satisfactory to us, and you can determine that by the second or at worst the third meeting. So I would advise investors to just be very accurate and honest about what they're looking for, and spell it out loud, and save yourselves and save the entrepreneurs the fatigue of going through the cycles over and over again. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, Godfrey. I mean, on Adelaide's point, can we not make this thing 1 hour calls? I mean, these are people's lifetimes and years of hard work. You can hear everything in 1 hour. Can we make the first call 1 hour just to know each other? Make the second call 3 hours, and then by the third call, make it maybe another 3 hours, and then you can decide. But you hear me for 30 minutes, 1 hour, and you don't want to hear everything and make your decision. It's not going to work. I mean, sometimes like, why the rush? You want to invest $1 million, $2 million. Spend some time to hear me well now. My voice is not that bad, right? I could hire a translator that speaks Queen English if that's required, but yeah.
Okay.
Help us.
Awesome. And thank you very much, everybody. And I think this is insightful, and I can hear from my end that people weren't holding back their own thoughts, however uncomfortable it may be for investors or for promoters. But just to summarize, I think to make the success rate higher in deal making in Africa in the impact investing space, there are some soft issues and some hard issues. And the soft issues of trust, values, alignment, and integrity is very important, because it is like marriage. And like Kanini said, you should think about it. Who do you want to be with, stuck with at the airport? Then the second piece is governance. Governance, and I'll just chip in to say that particularly for promoters, they shouldn't see governance as a compliant function. They should see it as a value add exercise that is being undertaken to make sure that the company is supported to scale. And it has connotations for reputation. So as you are building your governance structures, it can impact negatively or positively on your reputation. The other piece is that, you should share the process upfront, particularly it's coming from the both investors and the promoters. They share your process upfront. These are the things we're gonna do. These are the processes we're gonna pass through for the person to gauge the timing and adjust themselves. Salami mentioned cap table destruction. And I think in the early stage investing, particularly in the Series A, you may have to spend time as an investor to explain some of the terms, and then handhold the promoter as you do the deal so that they understand the processes of having a first official investor into their company. And he more or less inferred that greed doesn't pay. In doing all of this thing, nobody should feel like they want to be greedy in trying to cheat the other. And of course, time is money. The investors have to build a business, the promoters have to build a business, and there could be fatigue in terms of the number of calls, the number of meetings, the number of iterations you got to have. Please be transparent and speed up the process to reduce investor fatigue. Before we go to the audience, we've given some chance for the audience to ask questions. And thank you. I think Kanini is on the platform answering those questions. We've had 2 questions. But before we go into the questions, and probably I would summarize what those 2 questions are and the take, and maybe if anybody also has something else to add, could add. We are running a poll, and I'll conclude by telling you from the poll what the audience think is the major bottleneck to closing transactions in the impact investing space. So one question came and asked that, look, in Central Africa Republic or Central Africa region, there are no fund managers or investors. So the issue of maybe just going with soft money for a very long time may not be a good idea. What is our suggestion? And I think Kanini answered by saying, look, in that scenario, there's nothing wrong, going the route of taking some of these monies that is available before the ecosystem becomes well established, where you can now graduate to take on commercial capital. And then the second question was on the issue, and this is the guilt of the investors, and particularly those of us who are in the fundraising mode. Maybe I don't know if the person is directly targeting Avishka, but I hope not. The question is about people who are in the fundraising mode and they are building pipeline and so on. How should they engage with the promoter? And in addition to what Kanini said, I think the issue is transparency. You need to be transparent that you are on the road just as the promoter, also trying to raise money. You can give indicative time for your first close and when you'll be ready to deploy. And then the promoter may make up their mind and say, we cannot wait for you because we need the money ASAP. And that's a straightforward thing, to be transparent of your process of fundraising and when money will be available, rather than to string people along. But of course, you also know the fundraising horizon or timeframes are quite fluid. And sometimes you feel like you're gonna be done in Q2, but things like COVID happens and the whole year is wiped out your schedule. So I feel the key message or answer to that question is transparency, letting the fellow understand the timelines that you are working with. And if they can stay, they will stay with you. If they cannot stay, they will find another investor. Any thoughts, concluding thoughts from the panel members, either in response to the questions or your concluding thoughts on the topic? Let him start with Adelaide.
Sorry, Geoffrey, just repeat that again.
I was just saying I've given 2 questions that have been answered, but if you have some concluding remarks to make, or even not related to the question, you want to just make your final remarks concerning the topic that we are discussing.
Sorry, yes, of course. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm punchy. I guess from an Africa-wide perspective, this is a difficult continent. It has quite a lot of dynamics involved, social, economic, cultural, political, you name it. It's a continent that is quite adverse, as every single country that exists in it. So maybe just as a passing remark to all investors out there, take some time to understand and appreciate the continent with its potential, and try to de-escalate the challenges that come with it. Because I believe that this is a continent that is ideally the frontier. It's really the future. And it has been largely explored and untapped in almost every single industry available. So I'd request that while investing in these startups, just get your homework on the technicality of the specific industry that excites you. And every industry comes with its own very complex myriad of challenges. But this is a sweet spot of investment, because it's actually a rising context in regards to opportunity. So just be bold and take that risk, understand its challenges, but invest and see your investments grow. Thank you.
Awesome. Salami, your concluding remarks.
I mean, I think I've posted them on the chat. First is that Godfrey, you need to send out 10 commandments of deal making. If that's the bonus for everybody that stayed to the end of the call, please do that. The second point is that I think that term sheet or a no deal scenario should, by the 3rd or 4th call latest, you should, that's where you should get to. Like, sorry, this is the 4th call. We'll spend 10 hours, 20 hours talking about your business. We don't understand it, or we're not able to invest, or the market is small, whatever the feedback. I'm sorry, we're not able to do this. Or you know what, this is we're interested. These are the general terms we're thinking about. Again, this is not final and it's not binding. And after the DD, we can come to a final position. I think by the third or fourth call, let's do that, or let's just, let's put a pin in it. And the last thing is that deal making and founding team composition are key areas of support entrepreneurs need. We can't fix it all. We're hoping that investors, as investors always say, become a partner to entrepreneurs to try to solve these problems. Making sure that the entrepreneurs are thinking the right way, supporting very closely, on your board or in different capacities you can. I've had investors that have given us 30-40% more deal flows in a year. That's the kind of investor that we want. And I really appreciate all the investors for all the risk you guys are taking, specifically in Africa. We know it's not easy, but it's the same thing on both sides. So please, let's looking forward to you guys being more collaborative. Thank you very much. Godfrey?
Awesome. Tamer, your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, we've always said that doing business in Africa, whether as an entrepreneur or as an investor, it's not for the faint-hearted, right? Whether it's North Africa or South Africa, East or West, it's pretty much the same challenges. One thing that I would like to encourage, us as a team and everyone out there investing is if it's a no, make it a quick no. A quick no is much better for the entrepreneur than a prolonged yes. And for the entrepreneurs, I'd like to ask them to if you don't feel comfortable doing the transaction, pull the plug as soon as possible. Saving time for everyone is sometimes the best outcome. So and at the end of the day, we are all in it to do good for the societies we are in. We're in it to have a great impact. But at the same time, we owe it to our investors that we have to have financial returns, and as an entrepreneur, also owe it to themselves, to have financial returns. So let's go out and have some fun while responsibly investing and doing business.
Awesome. Then lastly, Kanini, your final thoughts?
I would say to reflect on the point that Adelaide made around the fact that Africa has its issues, as we all like to say. I would just like to turn around the narrative and say that we actually have a huge advantage on this continent, that it's pretty small in a sense in terms of the sort of investing ecosystem or the entrepreneurship ecosystems. So it's actually possible to do very good due diligence on your investor if you are a promoter or a entrepreneur. And I would advise you as an entrepreneur to do deep diligence, because that's what we're doing with you. And we have all these tools that we're using. All you need to do as a founder entrepreneur is just ask questions from others. Have you been invested in by this company? What are they like? Are they really impact investors? Do they really respect the people that they're investing in? Do they support the teams? Are they focused on the right things? Do they get the context? I find that that's a gap that remains. There's this very big power play between the entrepreneur and the investor. And the investor is doing all the diligence on the entrepreneur, but the entrepreneur is sort of just waiting there to sign a term sheet. It shouldn't be that way. Let's get that power play out, and let's ensure that both sides are doing the work that's required to get to know the other side as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm so honored to have you on the panel. And I guess we have about 55 people participating in this session. And I hope people have gleaned one or two from the sessions as to what are some of the major things that make deals fall through. And I'd like to conclude by saying that a failed deal does not benefit anybody. But it's also important that you cut your losses quickly, so you don't waste the time of either party. And before I sign off, I would like, if Messi is on the call, to share the results of the poll that we conducted. We wanted to hear from the audience what they think is the major thing that is responsible for deal breaking. And I think, like we were all talking about it, the issue of I think the value alignment it's an important thing. Being a deal maker, I thought before I came onto this platform, I thought valuation stalemate could be the issue, but the audience pretty seemed to agree with our panel on the basis of some of the soft stuff, as well as the lack of local context. So value alignment is very important because this is a marriage, and the marriage will work or fail if the soft issues are all aligned in trust, integrity, all of those things, and making sure that there's transparency. And then the second portion is other big factors is founders and management issues. These more or less tie back to integrity issues and then negative due diligence findings. So thank you very much. I think the audience is not far from what our panel of experts also think are the key things that, if dealt with, would improve the deal-making space in the early stage impact investing space. Thank you, everybody, and thank you especially to my panel members, Tamil, Kanini, Adelaide, and my brother from Nigeria. Thank you.